So today we are going to talk about Range by David Epstein. This book is largely a response to a certain school of thought, and let's call it the 10,000 hour rule school of thought, which sets up success as largely being the consequence of specialization, and that the way you should approach getting good at something is start early, get a lot of hours, and specialize really hard into it. And so Epstein opens up the book talking about, in particular, there are two examples that are often used for the 10,000 hour rule, sort of rule of thumb, and that is the Polgar sisters in chess and Tiger Woods in golf. So Epstein argues that there are two kinds of learning environments. There's kind learning environments and wicked learning environments. In a kind learning environment, the feedback you receive is largely immediate, the options and clear, and the options available to you are also very clear, and this allows you to make progress in understanding in a very linear way. He argues that for kind learning environments, the 10,000 hour rule applies. And this is an idea that was put forth in books like Talent is Overrated, where the thesis of talent is overrated could be, the thesis is in the title. They argue that being good at something isn't a matter of talent, it's just a matter of how many hours you put in. And to some extent, that's true. Hours will trump skill, in particular in chess. If you are talented, or if you're just good at chess and you study 100 hours, someone who was terrible when they started and study 1,000 will crush you. Another thing that gets brought up is so for the talent is overrated 10,000 hour paradigm is Tiger Woods started learning about golf when before he could walk, his dad would putt in front of him, in front of his crib, and he learned how to swing like by the time he learned how to walk. And he was entering tournaments when he was 6 and crushing like 12 and under or whatever the tournaments were that he had no business crushing when he was like 6, 8, whatever it was. And the Polgar sisters, Judith Polgar and Susan Polgar in particular, just kind of ran over women's chess. Judith Polgar peaked at number 8 in the world, which in the absolute category, as Susan might put it. And I think she's particularly admirable, Judith, because she was never women's world champion because she refused to play in all women's tournaments. And she actually played in the candidates tournament, I think in 2004, for the overall world championship. So back to Range. So what David Epstein argues is that getting started early is effective, but only in kind learning environments. And that in wicked ones, which a lot of life is, analogical thinking is what's important. Being able to draw from a lot of different things and synthesize information is important. And for that, you don't need specialization, brute force hours, and starting early. You need range. And so he offers up a lot of examples in the book. Like one interesting one is that science think tanks underperform, or they perform worse than amateurs that are just phoning in potential solutions, just because the amateurs have so many diverse ways of thinking. Generally speaking, the specialists can't find the creative solutions for things. So stuff that involves creativity, generally the specialists won't do well. Things where the learning environment is another example he gives is jazz. Being improvisational, it's better to play a bunch of different instruments if you want to be good at jazz than it is just playing one instrument, based on the research he cites. And so he kind of creates this counter narrative where, another thing is that he brings up that I think is really useful is starting early and just putting in a ton of hours and just getting on track is really pushed as what's important. Parents are pushing kids to be good at stuff. You are supposed to know what track you're on in high school, what you're going to do for the next 30 years or something. And he makes the argument that matching with what you want to do is more important than getting on track early. So the people who kind of go from thing to thing before finally settling in some sense, are ahead because they've figured out what they want to do earlier by moving around. And so it kind of creates this thing where instead of looking for brute force skill, match quality, like matching to what suits your personality in terms of work is more important than perhaps specializing early. Okay, so it's this overall counter narrative against this specialization narrative is basically what he puts forth. There are a lot of examples. I like his writing. Let's get into the ratings. So for utility, I gave this a 7. This is I've read several books recently that are the types of books I wish I had read about either like halfway through high school or on graduating high school in terms of understanding how I should plan or think of the rest of my life. And this is one I really wished I read. I think that having an alternative opinion to the hyper specialization that everyone encourages, or in my personal experience, that was always what was encouraged. And people who moved from thing to thing, it wasn't thought of as particularly good. And maybe I'm going to be biased with a lot of these ratings because I identify as a generalist, and so this book was like perfect for me. For entertainment, I gave it a 7. Yeah, I think his writing is very. I liked his writing, the way he wrote it. There are a lot of interesting tidbits. I perhaps entertainment's a little inflated because I really enjoyed reading all the stuff that seems relative to me because I've switched from things I've been interested in so many times. And I think that the way he specifically talks about how analogical thinking, thinking of one thing relative to another, leads to new breakthroughs, or synthesizing two different bodies of knowledge can lead to interesting things. I think that is really neat. So it was entertaining. For interest, I gave it a 7.5. I think the content is interesting. I gave some examples. For novelty, I gave it a 9.5, and this is probably inflated. But I think if you are the type of person who really has diverse interests, that being exposed to this narrative is actually incredibly useful relative to not being exposed to it. And so perhaps this novelty rating is specifically for people who don't just dive into one thing and just hyper specialize in it. For the people who are resistant to that type of thing, being aware that that might not even be the best way to approach things, I think is incredibly. I don't want to use empowering, but not disempowering is probably the way I would think of it. I know I've spent quite a bit of time beating myself up for switching what I've been interested in so many times, but then as I've gotten older, I've come to view having different interests and synthesizing them quite a bit of an asset. And this is even before I read this book. For style, I gave it a 7.5. His writing style is pretty good. Readability, 6. It's pretty readable. It's one of those science books done by people who write well type of books. So another author that comes to mind is Malcolm Gladwell. Kind of writes like this a little bit. Although I think that David Epstein is perhaps doing a little bit more research and a little less stylization relative to Gladwell. So he's providing more studies and then maybe constructing less of like an overarching meta narrative relative to Gladwell. And for difficulty, I gave it a 6. As far as recommendations go, I would recommend this to anyone who is currently in the process of choosing a field for uh, their life or something to that effect. So, people in high school, I would definitely recommend this to very strongly. Uh, I would also recommend this to people who have a wide variety of interests. And I would recommend this to people who are involved in specifically things that involve being creative. I think that the points that they make for analogical thinking and pulling from different areas uh, are pretty important for creativity. He spends a lot of time talking, or not a lot, but quite a bit of time talking about Nintendo and about how the person who created a lot of the really successful Nintendo stuff had an eclectic type of interest, and how they used like outdated technology creatively in order to create some of their best products. Um, Also, this book is just kind of well written, interesting, general sciencey book, so a general audience would be okay. But primarily, anyone who identifies as a generalist or is trying to synthesize things, or high schoolers, I would recommend this too. Um, Alongside, what was it? Andrew Yang's book, The War on Normal People, I would also recommend to high schoolers as kind of a bit of a warning for getting involved in things that are going to be automated away. But that relates to this book because a lot of the stuff that is kind learning environments where you're performing one thing extremely well, but it's a bit more formulaic and requires a little bit less abstract thinking and synthesis of information. A lot of that stuff's going to be automated away. And so it could be the case that moving forward, we're going to have less tasks that require specialization and more tasks that require range in terms of career path. Um, just because automation, the stuff that is kind learning environments, automation's really good at. Um, I mean, as far as AI goes, AI is really good at chess, but that's because chess is constrained. It doesn't. There are only so many moves available, and so because it's finite, an AI could do really well at it, and it gets feedback really well. But stuff that's not finite and requires a lot of perhaps thinking differently, AI is not very good at, but that's the type of stuff that range is good for. So those would be my recommendations. Overall, I liked the book, 7.21. I do think I inflate the rating is inflated a bit just because the book personally spoke to me. I think that uh, I this validates a lot of things that I've been suspecting to be the case, but are a lot of the information I receive has been contradictory to, and so I've been in a little bit of a I don't know what to make of this type of thing. Um, like synthesizing multiple things just seems like the right way forward, more so than specialization. But and so this brought that to light, and so perhaps I'm overrating it a little bit. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed. Uh, if you liked it, feel free to like if you or subscribe, and if you had any comments regarding where you think the future is going to come in terms of if it's going to require more heavy specialization or more range and with analogical thinking, feel free to comment on that sort of discussion because I think that'd be interesting. And I hope you have a good one.